They found you anyway. No number on your door, no street name on a sign, no postal code, no grid reference, no identifier the state could point to. And yet letters arrived, merchants tracked debts, doctors found the sick, constables showed up at the right door, bailiffs collected what was owed. People were found, summoned, served, and located with startling reliability across cities of hundreds of thousands, across countryside with no paved roads, across oceans. And nobody found it strange. Nobody thought we are missing something, because the system they had worked. It had worked for centuries. It ran on something older than bureaucracy, older than the printing press, older than government itself. It ran on people knowing each other. This is the story of how the world worked before addresses, before numbers, before the state decided it needed to be able to find you without asking anyone for help. This is 1765, and you are about to realize that the system we replaced was not primitive. It was just human in a way the current one is not. Start with something that sounds impossible. In London in 1765, the city held roughly 750,000 people. It was the largest city in the Western world. It had no street numbers. Most of its streets had no official names. The ones that did had names that nobody had standardized, names that shifted from map to map, from neighborhood to neighborhood, from one decade to the next. A single road running north from the Thames might be called 3 different things, depending on which end you were standing at and who you asked. By every modern assumption, this should have been chaos. It was not chaos. It was a different kind of legibility, a legibility built on layers, on signs, on memory, on trade, on gossip, on the accumulated knowledge of people who had lived in the same streets for generations. And if you want to understand how people were found in 1765, you have to understand what those layers actually were, because they were far more sophisticated than they sound. The first layer was trade signs. Before numbers, buildings announced themselves. Every shop, every tavern, every business of any kind hung a painted or carved sign above its door. A gold-leafed pineapple, a red hand, a white swan, a black horse, a crossed pair of scissors. These were not decorative, they were addresses. If you told someone to meet you at the sign of the 3 tons on Cheapside, that was as precise as giving a building number. Everyone in the neighborhood knew the 3 tons. The sign had probably hung there for 50 years. The signs were so numerous in London by the mid-1700s that they became a hazard, projecting iron poles extending over the street, each sign swaying and creaking in the wind. In 1718, a particularly large sign in Bride Lane collapsed and killed several people on the street below. Westminster eventually banned projecting signs in 1762, forcing them flat against the walls. But before that, the signs were the system. They were the address. You did not go to 14 Fleet Street. You went to the sign of the mitre. Everyone knew the mitre. Everyone had always known the mitre. The second layer was human memory. In 1765, the people who moved through a city carrying information were the primary infrastructure of location. Letter carriers, parish beadles, night watchmen, market traders, servants who walked the same routes daily for decades. These people did not consult maps, they held the city in their heads. When a letter arrived at a local receiving house, the carrier did not look up an address in a ledger. He already knew whose house you meant. He had delivered to that household before. He knew the family. He knew their cook by name. He knew which entrance to use. And if a new resident had moved into a house, the neighbors told him. Word moved through a neighborhood at a pace that seems extraordinary to us now, not because people were idle, but because proximity was constant. You shared a courtyard pump. You bought from the same bread seller. You heard what happened 2 doors down because the walls were thin and the windows were open, and everyone's business was, in the most practical sense, everyone's business. Letters in this era were addressed accordingly. The British Postal Museum holds examples that read like riddles to modern eyes. One envelope addressed to a tradesman in Bristol reads simply, "For William Marsh, the tanner near the quay. He has a red door and keeps a large dog." That letter arrived. The carrier knew exactly where to go. He had been going there for years. This is not a system failing to be modern. This is a system operating as designed. The third layer was the parish. The Church of England parish was not just a religious unit in 1765. It was an administrative one. The parish knew who lived where. The parish kept the baptism records. The parish buried your dead. The churchwardens walked the boundaries every year, a ritual called beating the bounds, physically marking the limits of their territory by walking them with parishioners, striking the boundary markers with wooden rods. Children were brought along specifically so they would remember. The body was the record. The parish priest could tell you which family occupied which cottage. The overseers of the poor knew every household receiving relief. The church vestry knew every ratepayer. This was not informal knowledge. This was the formal administrative knowledge of the era, and it was stored in human beings, not in ledgers organized by number. If you needed to find someone in 1765, you did not go to a government office. You went to the parish, you asked the right person told you. Here is what this meant for ordinary life, and this is the part that took me a long time to really see. In 1765, you could not be found by a stranger who had done no work. To locate you, someone had to already know you or know someone who knew you. You were embedded in a network of relationships, and that network was the address. Merchants who did business with you knew which street you lived on. Your landlord knew your door, your guild knew your workshop, but a government official arriving from another county, a military recruiter with no local contacts, a revenue man from London with a warrant and no knowledge of the area, they were at an immediate disadvantage. They had to ask, and the people they asked could choose how much to say. This was not an accident, it was a feature. The historian Edward Thompson wrote about the way pre-modern communities protected their members through what he called the customs of anonymity. You could vanish into a neighborhood that had decided not to see you. You could move 2 streets away, and if your neighbors willed it, become invisible to anyone without a relationship in that community. The relational address was also a shield. That is why the resistance to house numbers was so fierce when they finally arrived. In the 1770s, when Austrian commissioners arrived in Bohemian villages with paint and forms and military orders, villagers smeared the fresh numbers with mud. They scraped them off overnight. They hid their sons in cellars. These people understood immediately what the numbers meant. It was not the inconvenience of paperwork, it was the end of the shield. A number on the door meant a stranger with a ledger could find you without asking anyone's permission. By 1765, you are standing at the edge of that world without knowing it. The first numbered streets in Vienna are 5 years away. The great Habsburg conscription of souls, when commissioners would fan across Central Europe painting numbers on 389,000 houses, is still around the corner. Paris will require numbers on its provincial properties in 3 years. In Britain, the systematic numbering of London streets is still decades off. For now, you still live in a world where to be found, you must first be known, where your location is inseparable from your relationships. Where the letter to your house says near the cooper's yard, she keeps geese in the yard, you will know it, and it arrives. We gained something extraordinary when addresses came. Cities of 10 million, package delivery, emergency services that can reach you without knowing your name. Speed, scale, efficiency in quantities the relational system could never match. But what we lost was not nothing. We lost a system where finding a person required knowing a person, where anonymity was available to anyone whose neighbors were willing to grant it, where the state could not simply consult a ledger, it had to ask. The people of 1765 would not have described their system as freedom. They did not think in those terms. They just lived in it the way we live in ours. But when the men arrived with the paint buckets, the villagers knew what they were losing. They reached for the mud immediately. They were right, they just could not stop it.